Hi, everybody. First, let me say thanks to the Dubai Future Foundation. This is an amazing place to give a talk, and I'm glad to see you all. So, just a little bit about me. I'm from Los Angeles. I'm originally from Rochester, New York. I grew up in the shadows of Kodak and Xerox and brands like that. In the late 90s, I moved to Los Angeles to study design. I had previously studied architecture. And all I ever wanted to be since I was 4 years old was an architect. I never thought to be anything else. I think my grandfather gave me some blocks or something and said, you should, and I played with them all day, so he said, you should be an architect. And I was like, okay, I'll be an architect. And so it kind of stuck. But after architecture school, I became a little bit more interested in design. So I went to school to study industrial design. It was, at the time, it seemed faster and, more, like there was more I could do right away as a young person, as a young designer, than kind of what I saw as the architects that were all much older than I. So, so I started basically my career, I started in my studio in 2002. And for the first 10 years, I basically worked as an industrial designer. It was important for me. I really wanted to be a global designer. So I took my portfolio and I went to Milan, Italy, and I knocked on doors, and I kept going and going and going, and I kept knocking on doors. And finally, I think someone says, why does this American kid keep coming here? Perhaps we should let him design something. And that's basically how my career got going. At the same time, because at the time that wasn't really a good business for me, although it was fun, I was hired by Ford Motor Company. This was back when Ford they owned 11 car companies. They had purchased 11 car companies. And they wanted to make sure that each brand was different than the other brand. So we would do what we call design DNA work, meaning that if you buy a Jaguar, that's somehow different than a Land Rover. And so in a way, I was kind of working on furniture in these relatively small boutique design companies, mostly in Europe, and kind of we were doing strategy work for big companies. And over time, the studio basically split out into these two areas, and that was the first 10 years. After that, we were doing design and strategy for Disney, and they asked me to do a small space next to Disneyland in a building that Frank Gehry had designed. And it was a brainstorming space, somewhat like this, like a cultural place that was really about the creation of ideas. Not quite as cool as this, but still pretty cool. And that got us started on architecture. So now, today, our studio, which is called Cory Grosser and Associates, we're based in Pasadena, which is just north of downtown Los Angeles. And we do products, architecture, and strategy. And it kind of stems from just the history of my career. For the past 12 years, I've been a professor at Art Center College of Design, which is a good design school, very good design school in Pasadena. And my expertise is really tied to aesthetics and form. And that's pretty much what I'm gonna talk to you guys about today. In the studio, we call it creative intelligence, but that's really just a fancy way of saying that we're interested in what I call emotional design. I think the evolution of design today, we are at a point where let's say cost is equal. Let's say if cost is equal, let's say if quality is equal, what's left? And I believe what's left is our kind of human experience, the emotional reactions or the emotional feelings that you get when you use a product or you're inside a space. So that's what it's about, and that's kind of what I believe, and that's pretty much what I want to share with you guys today. So, so here's some of the brands we work for, and we're a relatively small studio, but we've been lucky to work with a lot of really nice brands. And when you work with brands, after a while, you learn this idea that brands are really a collection of emotions, right? So it's what brands are is the way we think about them and the way we perceive them. And likewise, in a way, that's what design is too. It's really about how we feel. So, everyone, for a second, think of your favorite restaurant. Just put your favorite restaurant in your head. Maybe you go back there over and over and over. Why? Why? How do you feel? Think about how you feel in your favorite restaurant. This is mine. I did not design it, but it's still my favorite. It's called Red Bird. It's a restaurant in downtown LA. It's kind of, it's stuck between two buildings, and there's this beautiful atrium over it. And when you eat there, you know, it just feels cool to be there, I would say. So that's part aesthetics, kind of the colors and the nature and just the more aesthetic experience. The food is phenomenal, a little expensive, but phenomenal. And then the other part is, this is where my girlfriend and I went on our first blind date. So you have the aesthetic part, you have the food part, and then you have what I would call the narrative part. And these three things make this restaurant my favorite. And maybe, if you think about it, maybe some of the things that make your favorite restaurant or your favorite shop are the same. It's part the way it looks and the atmosphere. It's probably the food, and it's maybe the history of experiences that you've had there. There's a really smart guy by the name of Donald Norman, and he's kind of an expert on emotional design, and he wrote a textbook that we teach a lot in product design school. And he has this idea, which has kind of become standard thinking about emotional design, that there's basically three levels. So the first level is what he calls the visceral, meaning it's like your gut reaction. This is like a little bit like love at first sight. Or when you see something and you want it, but you may not know why. That's visceral. It's happening. It's instinctive. This is in the realm of what I would call beauty. The next level is behavioral. So this is about usability. It's about function. It's rational. It's practical. And the last is called reflective. And I'm translating that to mean the phenomenon, the narrative, and the aspirational. So last night, near the Dubai Mall, my friends showed me the fountain, right? So I got out my camera, I took a video of the fountain going off, right? And now I have a history of that experience, right? So that's the reflective part of your brain working. So these are the three levels of emotional design, and this is what both academically and in the studio we try to think about when we design projects. Okay, I'm gonna take you through two examples to kind of explain this. So I was in design school when the first iPod came out. That's probably 2001. And my roommate, he did an internship at a company called 8 Inc. It's a studio in San Francisco. And they were in charge of designing the Apple stores, the original Apple stores. And he brought back this device. It wasn't on the market yet. They gave it as a gift. It wasn't for sale yet. But he brought it back and he said, check this out. And he gave it, I put it in my hand, I kind of twirled it around, and I said, I want that. What does it do? So my desire for the object preceded my understanding of how to use it, right? That's the visceral. And there's reasons for it. If you remember, you turned it around on the back, it was chrome. It had kind of this glass, what looked like glass front that was totally flat. Electronics, consumer electronics weren't designed like that. It was something new, not only in its use. In fact, it actually wasn't new in its use. It was not the first MP3 player. There was a history of MP3 players. But it was the first time materials had been put together like that in a consumer electronics. So the point is, I wanted this before I knew what it did. That's what we call the visceral. Okay, so I guess in typical American mass consumption, then they come out with another one, and somehow you still want that one. If we go to the iPod 2 and the iPod 3, they would make improvements. For example, now you have a color screen. Now the scroll wheel works a lot better. It becomes more functional, right? So that's the idea of you want it now because of behavior, because now you know how to use it, and now you look for its improvements, and now you want it again. Make sense? And then the reflective. Okay, so a really interesting thing happened when the iPod came out. Apple's really smart. They changed the earbuds from black to white. So before the iPod, earbuds were almost exclusively black. Yet, when you would be on a subway in New York City and you had the white earbuds in, people knew you had an iPod. In the beginning, they stole them, but that's a different story. So what happened was, eventually, everyone wanted the white earbuds, right? No one wanted the black ones anymore, because you started to become part of what we call in design education, part of a tribe, meaning like somehow this product connects you culturally to other people that have the same product. It's really, really smart. And so this is an advertisement from around that time. And you'll see it's just the outline of the women dancing, and all you see is the white earbuds. And that's all you needed, right? So this is part of, I would say, the reflective. It's experiential. You want to be part of an experience. It's not visceral. It's not based on function. It's that other thing. Okay, so that's consumer electronics. And I'll just give you a personal car selection. We've worked over the years with lots of car companies, so I like to kind of explain this stuff and use cars as examples. So I saw this car, and I wanted the car. And it's not a fancy brand, really. And because I was in car branding and design strategy, I was thinking, what's going on here? Like, this isn't a fancy brand. It has only 2 seats. I don't think it fits golf clubs. Like, it's completely non-functional, right? There's no function except these 2 seats, and somehow I wanted it. And I wanted it purely because of aesthetic reasons. Purely based on the form, the colors, the composition, purely aesthetics. So that's the visceral. Let's call it beautiful. So this is what we call the practical. So in America, we like these big SUVs with 7 seats, so you can put all of the kids in the back, and it doesn't have, I would say, the beauty of this, but it is quite functional. You can put 5 kids, 2 parents, and lots of golf clubs in the back, right? So this is the behavioral part of your brain processing, and the practical. Years ago, I did a project for Bentley Motors, and I took this photo at the factory. This is the Continental GT on the assembly line. So I got to see kind of the cars being made. This is what we call the aspirational, right? You want it because. It might, in my opinion, no offense to Bentley, I don't know that this one is as beautiful as the first one. Proportionally, probably, maybe not. It's not as practical as the second one, but I'm probably not alone in this room saying, I want this. Why? Why do you want it? Right? For all of those other reasons, right? For kind of complicated psychological reasons. Maybe it makes you feel, I suppose if you buy a Bentley, maybe it makes you feel successful, or, it's what we call signaling. It signals to others what they should think about you and strangers. I'm from Los Angeles, and I promise you, cars are constantly signaling. I think Los Angeles to this day is the epicenter of automotive culture, and all of the design studios at one point or another or all of the design companies have studios in Los Angeles, right? Because they know how much time also people spend in their cars. Anyway, this is the third thing. This is the reflective. In this sense, it's aspirational. And truthfully, after seeing the factory and seeing how, even on the Continental GT, they take the dash, and the dash is made, like wood pieces of the dash are actually made on woodworking equipment. That doesn't happen in the Mazda, and it doesn't happen in the Pontiac. I mean, a person is basically shaving these things by hand. And the seats for the Continental GT are sewn every day by two women. And if one of them is sick, the seats don't get made that day. So it's truly handmade. Okay, so basically, kind of these are the processing levels. Oh, I have one of these cars. I won't say which. So some of this is what I call, and what we lecture about, is called the psychology of form, right? And in design education, at least in the States, I don't know if it applies in other parts of the world, but the idea of aesthetics or style or beauty has gotten kind of a bad reputation, right? This is really silly, because there's a saying in the automotive industry, and it says, to make ugly parts costs the same as beautiful parts, right? So beauty doesn't have to necessarily cost more, right? But anyway, the dialogue is that designers are more than stylists, which is true. That's correct. Sometimes they're problem solvers. Sometimes they're futurists. Sometimes they're technologists. But also we are creating spaces and objects, and I believe that the forms that we create are important. And if we don't educate about that, we've lost something. So to do this, to kind of keep this idea going, I had to look a little bit deeper into what aesthetics really means. I had to become a little bit smarter about aesthetics so I could justify why students really still need this and why it's important. And there's three main questions I'm going to answer through this section. One is beauty subjective? Or I should say, is beauty entirely subjective? Are aesthetics tied to usability, and can shapes make you feel? Okay, let's start with this one. This was a study done in England in 1994, and basically what they did, let me go ahead one slide. You can see kind of this is the diagram of the study. So they put small children, little babies, in this infant seat, and then they had a video camera, and then they projected basically beautiful faces and not so beautiful faces. And then they studied how long the eyes of the children, babies really, not even children, how long that they stared at the particular faces that were put on the screen. Guess which they chose? Interestingly enough, the study was done to determine if it was about symmetry. And in the end, what they found was it actually wasn't tied to symmetry. The children had some other, that's a little bit unexplained, proclivity towards the pictures that were more attractive, not tied to symmetry, which is what before that was what we always thought. So it's probably, who knows, maybe it's tied to natural selection, I'm not really sure, but they found this in infants that were only starting at 4 months old. So very, very young. So in a nutshell, there's something that we're born with, some things that we're born with that are not subjective, that are not learned, that are just inherent to us. And surely that's not only what beauty is, but it's part of it. Okay, so this is the famous California sunsets. Do you guys know why they're so vivid? Because of smog. It's true. The smog, like the light reflects off smog and creates kind of this these very beautiful tones. And I would think, I guess I would propose, I guess I haven't put a baby out there to stare at the sunset, but if we do, I think that they would be pleased. I like to believe that the babies would be pleased. So years ago, we designed a line of fabrics that really try to kind of use the colors of the sunset in their weave. And the fabrics were used for cubicles, so to try to make things a little bit more pleasant. So we're trying to use some of these ideas. And we know inherently, all of you can probably think of certain colors that make you feel a certain way. We know this. Okay, so likewise, for a second, just think about the orange, right? In a way, it's a super friendly shape. Let's think about do they have this type of street cones here? Yeah? So which is the friendlier form? The orange, yeah. Why? Yeah, it's smooth, right? So a baby is going to be more attracted to the smooth form, the orange, than they are the cone. Even though one really isn't more dangerous than the other, one feels less dangerous. This is in basically what we call the psychology of form. So what I'm proposing here is that the shapes, as a designer or a creator, the shapes that you choose actually have deeper meaning. And we need to be a bit more diligent about the shapes we choose because they somehow influence the way we feel. When I was in architecture school, a gentleman by the name of Mike O'Brill was teaching. I went to architecture school in Buffalo, New York. And this is a really interesting project for the Department of Energy. So in, I think the 90s, they created a nuclear waste processing plant in New Mexico, right? And it was where fuel from nuclear reactors would go to be stored safely. And at its core, it was an engineering problem, right? How do we contain radioactive material? So they developed tanks that could hold the energy for 10,000 years, which is pretty good. Although they've had a few leaks, but different story. So 10,000 years, they basically devised these tanks. The trouble is the nuclear fuel lasts for 24,000. So we have 14,000 years where it's not contained, right? And they didn't know what to do. So they actually, they created a commission or a brief where they hired engineers, scientists, artists, architects to figure out how do we tell people that this area is not safe, right? And Michael Brill's concept is kind of, these are the illustrations that you can see here. And it basically uses these spikes to let people know that this is not a safe area. Because over 14,000 years, language doesn't matter anymore. Language will change. It's 800 generations. So basically it has to outlast language. So what they did was what I would call the psychology of form. They used forms that are quite scary in a way, and you know intrinsically, you feel, your emotions tell you, hey, not a good place to be. This is the psychology of form. Okay, the American architect in 1947 said, form follows function. This was taught in design schools for 100 years, or will be taught for 100 years. And it basically means that what you design should somehow relate to its function, right? This is what, we're in kind of that behavioral zone here, that middle zone. But this is about rationality. So we have there's three true pure geometries, what I call pure geometries: circle, rectangle, and triangle, right? These basically are made of math. They're completely man-made. A circle is man-made. There's nothing on your body that's a true circle. There's also no straight lines. So when we draw a sphere in the computer, right, the computer is calculating how to make this thing completely round. There's something about these shapes that, in a way, they might not be friendly, but they're familiar. They're safe, right? Close to the orange, but an orange is never truly round. So there's something about these ideas that's familiar. They're rational, they're pure. This is what we call, like I said, the pure geometries. In the 50s, I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, but this was when I was a kid, every house in America had this kind of thermostat. This is for changing the air conditioning or heating temperature. And you can see, obviously it comes right from the circle. And if you've never seen this object before, just imagine you've never seen it, which maybe some of you haven't, you kind of know what to do, right? It's what we call indexing, meaning you go up to something and you go, you know it's a dial and you basically know how to use it. I'll tell you a small story. Years ago, when I was on those early Italy trips, I stayed at a hotel in the countryside of Verona. And in the shower, there was a cord hanging down, right? With a little red pulley on the bottom. And I'm taking a shower and I was like, well, I'm gonna yank that. And of course, the fire alarm in the whole hotel went off because I had pulled this thing. And then I in Italian, like they're screaming at me, yelling at me. Basically, I kind of got kicked out of this hotel, but you know, it's a string with a thing. Like you're gonna go up and you're gonna pull it, right? Like it makes sense. That's what's called indexing. So that's what I would call like a rational object. We have this in the States. It's called the Nest. So it's a learning thermostat. But in a way, it uses the same usability. You turn it to adjust it the same, or you can adjust it from your phone, of course, right? So you know.
It does not have buttons, and so purely mechanical.
Yes. Yes, correct.
It's going back to the.
Yeah, in a way, because it makes sense. Like you go up and you know what to do, right? That's usability. That's what rational is, I would say. Here's a chair that we designed, which in a way is probably one of our more rational products. It's what we call a task chair. In Europe, they call it an operative chair because it usually has some, you can adjust the back, you can go up and down a little bit. This is the best-selling product that we have, actually. But it's pretty basic and it's pretty rational. You kind of know, once you find the mechanism, you kind of know how to use it, or at the very least, you know where to put your arms. You don't have to go through any, just like when you guys sat in these chairs, you didn't have to go through any, no one had to tell you how to sit down and put your arms, right? It's usable. But to your point, does form always follow function? Think about your phone for a second. All the things that it can do. I stopped at like 12. It can do all of these things. It's actually impossible for the phone for the form of the phone to follow the function. It's not possible, right? It has to be something else. And in fact, it has to be more of the reflective sense because you have to learn how to use it, right? The form does not apply. So in the 90s, Helmut Eisinger was a German designer. He started a studio called Frog. Frog worked on the early Macintosh computers, amongst other things. It was in the 90s a really influential design firm. He came up with this idea building on Louis Sullivan. He said, form follows emotion, right? So now we're getting closer into kind of what I believe. And if we go back to Don Norman, on the cover of his book, he used this product. Does anyone here know what it is?
Yes,
It's a citrus, yes. It's a juicer, exactly. There it is, yeah. So it was the star of Don Norman's book, right? And truthfully, does anyone have this? You saw it. Got it. I'll give you a hint. It doesn't do juice very well. In fact,
Enjoying doing juice.
Yes, exactly. They actually have a gold, you can buy a gold-plated version, and it comes with a little sign. It says, do not use it to juice. True. It's in the book. So what makes this, is this a product worth having?
Well, unless he made all sorts of products that were beautiful designs and more or less collector's items.
Yes.
And they're not for what they are, yeah.
This is what I would call a narrative object, meaning you buy it and your friend comes over and says, what's that? And you say, oh, it's for juice. And then you twist the juice and then you have juice and then you have now the story of the juice. Or you collect it because that reflective side is the realm of collection. So if you go to Paris and you get a tiny Eiffel Tower statue, right? That's your reflective memory working. Like you're kind of collecting it for that reason. Not because it's beautiful, not because it's functional, but for the other. Okay, here's one of our products for an Italian company. And you have to think a little bit about American culture and Italian culture kind of coming together. Does anyone know what this is? I'll be really surprised. It's bowling ball, yeah? Okay. There it is. Right, so I'll be honest, I designed it, so I'll tell you the truth. It's not a great wine rack. When you store wine, you're supposed to store it upside down so it doesn't go bad because the oxygen gets in between the cap and or on its side. So the
cork stays wet.
right. So when you tip the wine up like this, it's not the best. So behaviorally, it's not working so strong on the behavior. And frankly, it's not. I would go back. It's not that beautiful, really.
But what if you made it for the beauty's sake, what if you made it of another material?
It was supposed to be marble. I will tell you the truth. It was supposed to be marble. But it was too expensive to CNC. And we already can't sell any of these because it's so expensive. But there's the bowling ball. And I grew up if you grow up in Rochester, New York, you learn to play bowling. Like I have pictures of myself with a little bowling trophy, and very funny bowl cut hair. But it's a story. That's all it is, right? It's a story. And then when if you're one of the 5 people that have bought this thing, you have it in your house as basically a story. Okay, so that's kind of taking you through how we process design. More thinking about it from products, right? But in a way, it's the same lesson for environments. So we use kind of the same method. Even more so, environments, I think, space, architecture, has the power to make you feel more strongly maybe than an object does. Maybe not. I mean, cars are pretty powerful. Your phone is pretty powerful. So the idea here is that design is less about the creation of things than the creation of experiences. So whether you're designing a product or you're designing a space, really where we're at right now is what's the experience. So what's it like to be in this room, at this place, compared to another place down the road? It's important. Can anyone guess what this is? Workstations, cubicles, exactly. This is bad. There we go. There's like middle America, right? Circa 1985. Cubicles were designed in the 1960s, and one of the ideas was when the first cubicle was called the Action Office, and the idea of Action Office was that the employees could feel a little bit more secure, as if the boss wasn't kind of looking over them, right? And they would also have their own kind of private area where they could pin up pictures of their family and have knickknacks and things to make it feel a little bit more friendly, right? And in a way, that is the thing that's strong about cubicles even to this day. You do have like a little area, right? But other psychological things happen too. So you have these walls that are kind of just at your head height, and you can't really see over. So over time, and even in companies like Disney that have a pretty good corporate culture, when they have cubicles, everyone feels a little bit like it becomes about territory. Like, this is my space. Why are you looking over my cubicle, right? Who here works in a cubicle? Okay. Do you guys ever feel that? Yeah? Okay. So it started out, I would say, and I don't want to say cubicles are all bad, they're not, but it started out as a way to kind of liberate the workforce, if you will, and in a way over time it's in some ways done the opposite, right? So through our history, you know, we started working for brands, then we started designing furniture, then we started designing workplace furniture, and then we started to design workplaces, right? And so that's kind of the history. So we're very much interested in the psychology of how people work, right? So how can we take all of these lessons that we've gone over and think about what makes a better workplace? So just to give you some contrast, this is an old, I would call an old way of working, and this is a new way of working. So this was an office that we did in Pasadena, and it's for a tech company, and a lot of this is happening, a lot of our work is for tech. And the cool thing about tech is that they really want to spend money because they want the best employees. So they want the best engineers and the best salespeople. This company is competing with Facebook, they're competing with Google. We're in California, so the talent, there's a lot of talent competition. And the cool thing for a designer or a design studio like ours is that we can really think about how to make this place the best possible place, the most attractive place to work, right? So the space itself becomes a recruiting tool. And how you feel in the space when you walk in for the very first time, which is the visceral, right? Or after you've worked there for a week, which is the behavioral, or after you've been with the company for a year, which is the reflective, how do you feel about it? Do you want to keep working there? Do you want to switch companies? Or are you happy there, right? So our work in general, for almost all the spaces that we design, is about this. It's about how do people feel there. So we made these three little cubbies. In a lot of our projects, we use these. And when you walk through the space, the photographs are a little devoid of people, but when you walk through the space now, often you'll see at least one person in one of the cubicles, right? And usually they have their feet up on the sofa area with their laptop and they're working. Because what's changed in the workplace is this idea of posture, right? People don't, in general, want to sit in the same posture all day. It's actually not the most productive, right? So what we do is we create several different postures throughout the work area. You see, I'm sure they're here, standing desks, right? Very popular now, right? It's probably a little bit better to your back, but I prefer to sit down. But again, it's really about changing your posture throughout the day. We're lucky, as you guys are here, we can work outside. So along the left is completely outdoor work. So there's sofas, there's high tables like in a cafe, there's a long, more picnic table kind of experience. So you'll see people out working to the left. This area here is more kind of, again, like that cafe sensibility. So you have these long banquettes where you sit and you can put your laptop up or you can eat your lunch, right? So what happens is employees move throughout the office during the day, right? Some offices have no cubicles or no permanent spaces left. And I think for someone my age, that might be alarming. But if you're 25 years old and you're used to working at school or in coffee shops, and then you go to the office and they give you a nice laptop and say, hey, work wherever you want, you're like, yes, this is great, right? So these things are changing, and it's our job as designers to kind of understand how these things are changing. So I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the conversation pit, but it was kind of this in the 70s. In the 70s in Europe and the US, it was like this sunken living room, kind of, right? And when you sink down in, what happens? Like, let's say you sink in with your family or your friends.
You feel cozy?
Yeah, you feel cozy, exactly. You want to socialize. You feel, in a way, warm. To the right, I don't have a great photo of it, but you'll see traditional, not full cubicles, but they have partitions. This is where sales and marketing works, and they wanted a little bit of privacy between the person next to them, right? On the other side, like way over there, is engineering. And engineering wanted completely what we call open plan desks, meaning they wanted to see their colleague across from them, and they wanted to see their colleague next to them. I don't have good photos because they're now so messy. This is a conference room. So we created a sofa. So instead of having only very formal chairs, you kind of have a little sofa that can be pulled around. So again, you feel more comfortable.
Just looking at someone sitting at the sofa would make you feel comfortable.
It should, yeah. It make you feel a little bit less formal, I think.
For those who come early, I guess, to the meeting.
What's that?
For those who come early to the meeting.
If you come, we can have a meeting there, I promise. I'll take you, we could have a meeting right there. So this is the this is the CEO's office. So this is the big boss, right? So in a way, they chose, in a way, a somewhat traditional executive office, meaning that it's in the corner, right? It's facing the walls. He's not out with the other employees. But what we did was we put a giant glass wall in the front. So when he's on the phone, you see him on the phone. If he's on the computer, you see him on the computer. If he's on the sofa. So although we're using a little bit more traditional way of thinking about the executive office, it's completely transparent to the employees. It's not behind a closed door. So we hope, I think, that people feel more comfortable. You feel a little bit that your boss is more accessible. Now, the cool thing is when you get to work for tech companies, you can design things like this. So I think this in a way is the state of affairs for very kind of this technology company office design. So this is a band room where if you're an employee here, you can play music inside. It has, in a way, very little function, you know, outside of employees' enjoyment, outside of building culture. And when I say culture, I mean the culture of a brand, right? Which is so important. Meaning, do the employees feel like they belong? Do they want to come to work? Do they want to stay there? You know, when Facebook calls and says, hey, we're going to give you $10,000 more, what do you want to do? Do you stay or do you go? So anyway, this was really fun because we got to design kind of how the sound works and we have a working office right next door, right? This giant office. It's a pretty big space, so we had to figure out how to keep the sound in. I will admit we made a little mistake at the beginning. All the sound went through the lights. We didn't properly seal the lights, so we had to go back and seal the can lights. Okay, so that's that project. I'm going to show you this one and one more project, and then we can open it up for questions. But this is called the Supply Frame Design Lab, and a little bit, it's like some of the things I've seen here at the Future Foundation. It's a makerspace, right? So the idea of this place is that if you have an innovative idea, you can come and be a resident and work on your idea for 3 months to try to create a real product. And the boss or the president of this company took me out to lunch because he knew I worked at the school, and he said, hey, like, how do I can get engineers to come here. Engineers, no problem. But how do I get artists and creative people to come here? And I said, I know how. You can let me design it. And he's like, really? I'm like, yes. And so we got to kind of design this lab where creative things happen. They actually didn't know much about what it would be or what it would, it was kind of this idea is if you build this thing, people will come to try to kind of to create here. So this is, behind me is basically the street facade. So we created kind of this box that went through, and this is more of the gallery area, so that work that's created is kind of shown out here. That's the main conference room. You can see my chairs are there. We get to put our own furniture in our projects most of the time. Those are our sofas too. And so we try to kind of make it feel, right? Because we're always thinking about how something feels. Like kind of like a secret club where if you were into coding, you would go there and you would just code all night, because we knew that coders really, they work all night. They put their headphones on and work through the night, right? Everything happens at night. So we kind of tried to make this space feel black and kind of like you're in part of this secret den where you create things. So we use kind of this, steel cladding and all this furniture that can be reconfigured. And so these are mini CNC on the right side. They're mini CNC machines for cutting circuit boards. These are 3D printers. And we had this idea that coming up with ideas should be celebrated. So the concept was, it's like theater. Like instead of going to the movies, you can kind of watch something be made. This is the shop, so it has larger types of CNC machines and milling machines. This is just an example of our renderings for the project. So we work in a very kind of methodical way. because we're so interested in the idea of aesthetics and emotions, we work like this. So we make these renderings and we make sure that they have the right feeling. So unlike almost all the architecture firms that I know of, they start with space planning, meaning just like that cubicle diagram, they think about how you move throughout the space and where the desks go and how many desks you can get. And that concept works really well in that behavioral zone, in that middle functional zone. But it doesn't work really well on the aesthetic side or on that other side, on the reflective side, right? So we basically use what we call vignettes, which are kind of 3D examples, and then we do space planning. So we have our vignettes first. Okay, the last project I'm going to show is a retail store. It's actually inside the lobby of the Los Angeles Public Library, which is the second largest library in the United States after New York. And it's a beautiful, quite old building, and they have a tiny gift shop. And if you go into the gift shop and you buy a book or a bag or a greeting card, the money is then returned to the library. So it's a foundation. And it was a tricky project because we had to basically put a shop that felt fresh and modern in a space that's actually not. That's more historical, right? So you can see some of the things we did. We tried to we used the wood that basically was used throughout the entire library, and then we kind of used this bright blue color. It's quite dark in there in the library, so we wanted to kind of make it feel more fresh, more alive. And you can see on the floor, we transitioned from kind of the wood color into more of a white tone. From the lobby, we created kind of these pockets where you could see the objects for sale from both the outside and the inside. So you can turn them around and they can face, so it's kind of like creating a storefront. But our big move here was to create kind of this lenticular experience. Do you guys know what lenticular is? It's like, have you ever seen like a sign that or a card that when you turn it, the image changes? That's called lenticular. It's this type of printing where it has little tiny ridges, and so you see it when you flip the card. So what we did was we tried to kind of create this experience. So when you're walking in the store, it's supposed to feel super fresh and super bright and there's this bright blue, but then when you walk, after you buy something hopefully, when you walk out, it's supposed to remind you you're going into a place that's back to a place that's more traditional. So this was our concept. We doubled the sales of the library store after this project, so they're happy, I hope. Then we tried to use different elements, so they sell kind of fabrics and whatnot, so we used the idea of the library ladder as kind of our display case. And there you go. There's one of my staff. We're always the models for our own photo shoots. But I guess in the end, it's really, you go into a store, just like I started the presentation, you go into a restaurant, and you create a feeling, you create an atmosphere. So when you're here, you're supposed to feel fresh, and you're supposed to feel cool, which probably makes you buy things, right? If you feel like uncomfortable, unwelcome, cold, all of these things, you won't buy. You'll leave. So if I take Louis Sullivan and I take Helmut Eisinger, I would say that form follows empathy, right? So what we talk about and what I think the future of design is it's really about thinking how people feel, whether you're designing a product or you're designing a space. If you can think about and design around emotions and feelings, that's irreplaceable. And in the end, that really produces the best outcome. So, in closing, I want to say thank you for having me very much. Thank you to my friends, Hassim and Ahoud, for taking me around Dubai. And I'm pleased to say that I will be back. We are opening an office here in Dubai, not far from here in the Park Towers. It should be open in February, and I hope to see all of you. Thank you.